So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Lord Frost claiming Brexit has revived British politics and is healing democracy, and this is a nonsense statement, and we'll go through it breaking down the article. So Brexit is healing democracy and has revived British politics, former Minister Lord Frost has claimed. The Tory peer and former chief Brexit negotiator said leaving the EU has given the UK the opportunity to, quote, debate and change everything again in this country. But in a swipe at Sunak's Windsor framework, Lord Frost said the benefits of Brexit did not apply to everyone, and he defended populist politics as, quote, reflecting citizens' actual views, end quote. And for me, I kind of get what he's saying in terms of we debating, kind of Solvency 2 and things like that, but it's nonsense because in the end no one's got a mandate for this sort of stuff. The Tories didn't run a manifesto on reforming Solvency 2 that could potentially bankrupt pension companies and cause people to lose massive amounts of money, etc. None of this stuff was debated. That's the problem. The voters never had a say in this. In terms of deregulation, the EU retention bill, the voters haven't got a say in it, and we'll discuss more of that during the video. So we'll go into detail about why his comments are dumb in a bit, but taking a dig at Sunak over the Windsor framework, when this is the dude, Frost, who came up with the Northern Ireland Protocol, then lied about the consequences of it, you can sit outside for this one. They won an election with the Northern Ireland Protocol playing a part of it, then tried to renege on the deal that they were partially voted in on and had no mandate to renege, because the Northern Ireland Protocol is fairly popular in Northern Ireland as well. So I do not get what bro is talking about here. Frost's comments came in a debate in the House of Lords, during which the Green Party's Baroness Johnson of Molescombe compared the, quote, corrupt far-right government, end quote, with 1930s Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party. Speaking in the Lords, she said, quote, this is not a democracy, this is not a country we can be proud of anymore, end quote. And I'm always wary of Nazi comparisons. There was, of course, the Night of Long Knives, in which Hitler culled the party and got rid of certain political rivals and anyone he saw as a loose thread. The Night of Broken Glass, where predominantly Jewish business owners were attacked and had their businesses broken into, amongst other things. Also, Hitler massively centralised power, which I don't think the Tories have really done that much. Hitler also used things like the Reichstag fire to further do this and attack, minorities. In this case, it would have been the Communist Party, who were an opposition party. There are also things that would make the comparison just really poor and nonsensical. Other things you can argue. You can argue that some of the politicians, like Suella Braverman, are using phrases like claiming that people crossing the English Channel are, quote, swarms, end quote, or an invasion. One such Holocaust survivor called out Braverman over the language she uses, and that's an easy and apt comparison to make because you can see the clear comparisons on language. But beyond that, I'm always wary of comparing ourselves to, or comparing anyone to 1930s Germany, because 1930s Germany were really bad if you haven't read a history book. Wayne Hennessy. In response, Frost thanked Lady Jones for securing the debate and said, quote, he did not recognise her bleak, rather fantastic and comic picture, end quote, of the UK. He said, quote, when the nation state weakens, confidence in democracy weakens, and that is just what we saw in this country over the last 50 years during the time of our membership of the EU. Then we were in practice only a limited democracy. Fewer and fewer issues could be settled at national elections, end quote. And I don't think we actually saw democracy weaken over 50 years. It's really been the same it's been for probably a century. A crappy first-past-the-post system, which creates safe seats and often is run by one party until people get sick of them, and it swings to the other party. 2010 being an exception with the hung parliament and the coalition, and 2017 you can argue with the small coalition the Tories had with the DUP. You can argue the party system keeps giving us leaders of parties who are poor, and then leads to poor leaders and ministers. People like Johnson, Cameron, May, Starmer, Sunak, Corbyn, Nick Clegg, etc. They were all pushed by the party systems, and in the end, as a voter, you only get an option of who the party decides. That's one of the key problems. This is the footballification of politics, as kind of James O'Brien would say, but it's too partisan. I think you're not getting the best people. You're just getting people who can play the game really well, I guess. And that's not what Frost is arguing, though. We were never a limited democracy. The Prime Minister and the ministers played key parts in forming EU law via the Council of Ministers within the EU. Also the MEPs we had, but, we sent a bunch of clowns for both. We played a key part in forming EU rules. We also had issues. We had those issues settled at national elections based on what the governments proposed they were going to do, and the directives that were set out by the Council of Ministers along with the Commission and the EU Parliament. These were done by these are done predominantly by British ministers, or at least the British ministers played a large part in the formation of EU rules. You can also be pedantic and argue that these decisions were not made within the nation, but obviously made within the EU, predominantly inside Brussels, I think. But, these were shaped by the nation's politicians. So I'll call this one and the same. It's just nonsense to argue that, it wasn't British politicians who played a key role in the formation of laws here. This idea that it was the Commission that did everything is nonsense. The people who argue that have no idea how the EU works, or just want to spread blatant misinformation. I wonder which one Frost would fall into. He said, quote, policies on trade, agriculture, fisheries and the environment, employment, social, migration, citizenship rights could only be changed by agreement in Brussels, whatever our national electorate said, end quote. And again, we were represented on trade. May famously killed a deal with India because she did not want to see more Indian citizens come here because India wanted easier visas for Indian citizens. That's one of the things they push in their trade deals. So this idea is rubbish. On the other things, we had representation from British ministers and MEPs. Farage famously was on the Fisheries Committee. It's a shame he didn't turn up. So on any of those, on employment, the EU didn't stop us having crappy things like 0 hours contracts. On migration, we had control partially over EU migration, and even then certain certain people from EU states had to have certain work papers just to work in the UK. I think Croatia was one, from what I remember, and there were also limits put on EU members when they first joined the bloc. Tony Blair famously did not use that mechanism because he wanted people to come here because it pushed the British economy to reach further heights. And what he says is nonsense. You can debunk each one if you really want to. He said, quote, it's no wonder that I think that people switched off and stopped believing voting could change everything, end quote. And people, for me, switched off because politicians stopped listening to them, or people perceived they were not being listened to. This is partially due to the party system mentioned above, politicians blaming the EU for lots of our problems, but also pushing policies like austerity, which people did not like, a fall and general decline in living standards. When you keep telling people the EU are holding us back, why would people believe in British democracy when all you did was blame immigrants and foreigners for all our problems? When it clearly wasn't. Where do you go from there when none of the problems are being resolved and you have full control over immigration? Doesn't make any sense. He said, quote, luckily we have now escaped that, or at least 95% of us have escaped that since the Windsor Framework unfortunately preserved some of these weaknesses. I hope not for too long. Overall, we have brought politics back home. We have revived political life. We can debate and change everything again in this country. Of course, it's clear that people are uncomfortable with that. They call it populism when a democracy reflects its citizens' actual views. But for me, it is a strength. Our democracy is healing. Politics is coming back home, end quote. And, if that's the case, if all of these changes are so popular, right, what you want to do is wait for the next general election and push these all in your manifesto. Let's see how many votes you get, big man. Because I guarantee you, if you start pushing ideas like more sewage in the rivers, which the Tories are actively doing, you ain't going to win, son. Let's be honest here. And, breaking this down, a dig at Northern Ireland, despite him and Johnson creating their situation, the idea that we brought politics home, we've only given it away to New Zealand, Australia, and the CPTPP via our crappy trade deals, allowing substandard goods to come into the country. Especially looking at Australian CPTPP members. The latter allows businesses to sue us in secret courts over lost profits. We haven't revived democracy or politics at all. People don't want the EU retention bill to pass or the scrapping of the Northern Ireland Protocol. You got all of these ministers saying, oh, of course we're going to keep workers' rights, yet they won't put it into law. Why is that? The Tories are making decisions they have no mandate for, things that poll badly, and the things that the Tories didn't actually promise in their manifesto. They also broke the manifesto promises like raising taxes, and obviously the triple lock pension as well, which they broke. Democracy is not healing. We had 2 unelected PMs, one almost tanked the economy, Liz Truss, and another forcing austerity 2.0. Where's his mandate for that? Because Johnson said austerity would not be coming back. If anything, politics is dying. I can see the next election having a low turnout, exacerbated by discriminatory voter ID laws created to stop certain kinds of voters, and also, party leaders that don't inspire confidence. British democracy isn't healing; it's rotten to the core, and that's only been made worse because of unelected lords, one of which is consistently lying about his legacy and the actions that he did during the 2019 campaign, the actions he took for Johnson. This guy isn't a clown, he's the entire circus. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.